Broadcasting from the campus of Lynn Benton Community College. We are the Mid-Valley STEM-CTE Hub. I'm your host, Casey, and this is Closing the Gap. Hello, Closing the Gap listeners. Welcome back to this episode. I'm super excited to have Dr. Robin Barre back on for a second part of the show. After our first meeting with Dr. Robin Barre about a month ago, I was left with a bunch of questions about how we can apply IFS to our students and our practice in our daily classrooms and with young people that we are interacting with on a day-to-day basis to help foster confidence in the classroom, fun in learning, and the ability to take healthy risks when learning and when being in the classroom. So, without further ado, let's hear what Dr. Robin Barre has to say about the application of IFS in classrooms. Hey, Robin, welcome back. Thanks for joining us again today.
I am very, very delighted to be back. Thanks, Casey.
So after our conversation last time, I was left with this question: can we identify other people's parts? Like if I'm a teacher and I know a student very well, would I, in theory, be able to pick out one of their parts and recognize it?
Yes, you can. And I know you had asked me about self-energy. And that was a question that maybe we were going to address later, but I want to talk about it now because that is a good way to talk about this question we have. So in addition to, so in internal family systems, in addition to parts, and we have parts that do these jobs, like if there's trauma or trying to navigate life, if things are difficult, parts do their job, but what we really are aiming for is what we call in IFS, internal family systems, is self-energy or self-led parts. And so what that means is we say that our parts are what we are. I mean, who we are. It's our ego stuff. But they're not what we are. And what we are, we would say, is this thing we call self-energy. We also could say we are greater than the sum of our parts. So I'm not just a therapist. I'm not just a wife. I'm not just, whatever. I'm not just angry. And especially if there's trauma, especially if there's a lot of stuff going on in somebody's internal system, then what we are aiming for is this thing called self-energy. And it's not parts. They are qualities, they are aspects. And some of the signs or aspects that we're looking for when we have self-energy in our system are things like, and it doesn't have to be all of these. So, and we call them the 9 C's. So they all begin with the letter C. Calm, some measure of calm. Perhaps some measure of compassion, self-compassion or compassion for others. Confidence, the ability to connect with one another. Clarity, we could say perspective, a larger perspective. Curiosity, creativity, courage. There might be one other one in there. And the ability to make choices, not feeling like we're forced into something. So if I show up to you and I'm like, what? Oh gosh, I don't know what to do. Or I'm irritated or something like that, you would know there's a part on board. Like if I'm snapping at you, or if I'm dejected, I can't do this, I'm stupid, there's a part, right? So anything, we would say, interestingly, anything that's not one of those 8 C's is an indication that there's a part on board. We always have parts. So this is kind of who we are and what we do. But I think your question is pointing to if there's a difficult interaction or if there's a concerning interaction between a parent or a teacher and a student. The question is that a part? Can I tell that there's a part there? And yes, you can. What we don't want to do is assume that we know what the part is. We don't want to do that. But we can at the very least say that this individual in front of me is not able to access self energy. They're too stressed out, too overwhelmed, too much. Their critic is too much on board. And so we know then that we are working with a part. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned we don't want to assume we know what part that may be. Why is that?
Well, let's this is why. So let's imagine you're really frustrated. You're really angry. And I say, "Oh, well, you have a frustrated part, don't you?" It doesn't feel good. It just doesn't
Right.
feel good. And like I met with a client last night, and I had heard from their friend that, because I was working with the two of them together, and the friend said, yeah, they were really mad. And so I made an assumption, and I said, so you had this angry part on board. And that person was like, no, no, no. I wasn't angry. I was sad. And I keep thinking, no, you were angry. But they were very insistent that they were sad. And it's their system. It's their experience. I don't really have the right to say, oh no, if you act angry, it must be an angry part. Their experience was sadness. And so what I could say is there was a part in you that was speaking with a certain tone of voice to your friend. And it didn't feel good for either one of you, right? So we don't want, if we name the part in the other person, we are assuming that we know what's happening inside of them, and we don't.
Mm-hmm.
We don't.
So it could maybe alienate a student or a person,
Yes.
or make them, I don't know, maybe confused about how they feel. I guess that's
Yes.
kind of another thing coming up for me.
Could make them confused. It could invalidate them. It could be um, some like feeling like they're being controlled somehow or judged somehow. So how do you be with someone when you know there's a part there? It goes back to the validation process that I teach, which is I might assume, I might hold this idea or this concept, oh, this person is in their parts, they have a part that's acting out. But I can just hold that and just say, so if it's a student of mine, I feel like you're really frustrated right now. And that's all and yeah, I'm super frustrated, or no, I'm not frustrated, I'm just overwhelmed, right? So you can name the emotion, or you name the, I see that you've got your fist clenched and you've got a frown on your face. What's happening? That's kind of the reporter observation, just the facts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I
yeah, you
appreciate
can
how,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I appreciate how you also included an I feel statement instead of it being the facts. It's just how you are feeling, and it's not necessarily like putting it on them.
Yes, exactly. There's, you want to, so another thing about naming somebody's parts is you close up the interaction space. If you say, I feel like you might be frustrated, you've opened it up. There's room now for this dialogue. There's an invitation to disagree with me, right? Or to say, what is it, what you're actually feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And what can be really helpful though, about no understanding this idea that we are parts and we're just usually in and out of parts, is that if I have a student who's upset and talking back to me, for example, if I understand that this is a part of them, I don't have to take it personally.
Mhm.
I might have parts that take it personally, but then I can work with my own parts and go, oh no, this is their stuff. They're frustrated or something. I mean, so it's a way to depersonalize, to not take it personally. It's very helpful. Yeah.
When I hear that, I think about the adults of the situation maybe needing to, I don't know if it's like check the ego, but definitely take a step back with their emotions. And it's more about the adolescent person at that point, and then dealing with how you feel maybe, after the interaction's over.
Yeah. I feel very strongly it is the adult's responsibility to work on regulating their own emotions, being with their parts, taking responsibility. It can be really hard. I'm not saying it's easy, but I feel like it is their responsibility. There's a hierarchy, right? Especially if it's a parent, child, or student, teacher, there's a hierarchy of power here.
Hmm.
And the adult is the adult, and the adolescent and child are the youth. Um, Children and adolescents learn how to regulate their emotions by watching us regulate our emotions. If we are dysregulated when we're with our kids, they're going to be dysregulated. So it is kind of a cardinal rule in the field of parenting and mentoring and education now, that it is, we don't put this on the kids, and we teach them if we're emotionally regulating and they're still dysregulated, it's our job to teach them. We can help them, we can scaffold them and say, all right, you're frustrated, I see that, you know let's see what we can do.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And the thing that's coming up in my mind is, uh, I don't know if you've ever heard of this or anyone listening's ever heard of this, but I've heard of the concept of inheriting things like anxiety, or um, those things that kind of make you uncomfortable sometimes in like social situations as an individual. Is that an example of um, showing your kids dysregulation in their emotions?
Well, it would be, I mean, we're all going to be upset sometimes or overwhelmed, or um so I think it's really more about, um I think it's more about modeling how, if, well, here's a good example. I have a friend, a really good friend, and I love this. She posted on Facebook yesterday. She said, it was 3 pictures. She said, I want to show you what what it looks like to go from being emotionally dysregulated to regulated. So her card broke down. She was overwhelmed. She was supposed to be somewhere. And so there's this first picture where you can see it on her face. And then what she did was she took her breath, she did her work, and then you can see it. Her face is relaxed. She's got kind of a smile. And that's what we want to do. So it's not that we're not getting overwhelmed, that we're not getting stressed, we're not anxious, we're not angry. We're going to be. But can we move through this and continue to take responsibility for ourselves through that? So if I'm angry at a child, what I don't want to do is say, you make me so mad. You need to stop that right now. You better behave. Watch your attitude because you are pissing me off. That's not me managing that's not me emotionally. I would say, whoa, wait a second. You're angry. I'm getting angry. I've got to take a time out. I'm going to take a deep breath. This is not okay. And I'm getting angry, and I don't want to say something I'm going to regret. But I do want to let you know I'm quite angry right now. And then I'm
Yes,
going to do my work to breathe and whatever it is I need to do.
that makes sense. And so getting upset and using that kind of language is the opposite of scaffolding in this situation. Could you give a little reminder to our listeners what scaffolding means?
Yes, I love this concept. I don't think it's mine. I like to claim that it's mine, but it's not mine. I know it's not mine. But I use it all the time. So, we have the scaffolding that goes up on the side of a building when a building is being built or it's being renovated or it's coming down. I mean, there's some work that's happening. And the scaffolding is what allows the construction workers to be present at those places where the issues need to be addressed.
Mhm.
And we can do the same thing with our kids. So scaffolding is this idea where we're tuning in and we're looking to see where is it that they are needing more support? Where is it that they want to try out their independence a little bit more and are ready and we can pull back? We are tuned in. We give them space when they push back at us and say, I want to do it myself. I don't need your help. And we know they might fail, but they're ready to fail. They're ready to try and ready to risk. If they are like my grandson called the other night, he's 17. He reached out to me and he said, can you talk? And so I got on the phone with him. I could just hear it in his voice, just so despondent. It was late at night. He's on the East Coast. I'm on the West Coast. And he just was really, I could just hear the sadness. And I said, hey, what's going on? He goes, you know, I just think I might want to come live with you. I said, okay. What is it your mom and dad? No, friends. It's just friends. I said, are they giving you a hard time? He said, yeah. I said, do you want to talk about it? He goes, no. I said, can I just ask you why? He goes, I just don't feel like talking about it. I said, okay. And so we talked about other things. We talked about horror movies. But so this is a moment of scaffolding. So he reaches out, I'm there, I support him in the way he wants and needs to be supported. The therapist in me and the grandmother in me wants to say, these parts of me is like, tell me what's going on. I'm going to fix it for you. But I'm tuned in, right? And the scaffolding is he needs me this much. He doesn't need me any more or any less. And I'm going to respond to that from that tuned in place. And I do my work over here with my worried parts, the parts of me that want to fix it. I was tempted to text his dad and say, check in on him. And I thought, nope, this is a 17-and-a-half-year-old kid. I've got to trust him. He knows what he needs. So that's an example of a kind of scaffolding. We and there's different levels. Different kids have different needs. Do I need to remind my child to make sure that he's got his assignment done, or do I just let him go and let him, possibly he's got to fail this class? Maybe that's a scaffolding thing. You've got to figure out if you don't follow through, if you don't meet your responsibilities, there are real life consequences. But if I have a kid who has ADHD, some executive functioning stuff, then I might need to scaffold them more. That's not fair, right? So there's this attunement.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And before we kind of keep moving down this, I realize towards the beginning of the episode, you mentioned you wanted to talk a little bit about self energy. And
Oh, yeah. So let me come back to that. Thank you. So this idea of self energy, so is that when we do the work of working with our parts and working with our internal system. The first part is to become aware that we have parts on board. And so I'll continue with my grandson's scenario. In the past, before I understood all of this and knew this, I my worried parts come on board, and if my worried parts come on board because that doesn't feel good, then I've got my problem solver, rescuer, fix it parts come on board, and they're just going to go to town, and that's not going to feel good to my grandson. So what the antidote to this is, and when we say managing your emotions or working with your parts, what we're really talking about is, how do I access self-energy? The theory is, and we see it all the time, so it's not proven without a doubt, but that we all have it. We come into the world with it. And so it's not that we have to strengthen our self-energy. We don't have to develop it. We have to access it. And how do we access it? We just keep asking our parts to give us just a little bit of space. So I can say to my worried parts, I can take a deep breath, and it's validation. It's self-validation is really what it is. I can say to my worried parts, I know I'm really worried about my grandson. I'm worried. It makes sense. He's been through a rough time. It's a hard life as a teenager these days. So I really validate my experience. And then I say to my fix-it parts, and I know we just want to get right in there and just fix this all up. I get it. So that's the self-validation. And we need to be able to trust him. Let's just take a deep breath. Can you give me some space inside? Just dial that energy down a little bit. Just move back just a little bit. So now I can begin to access self-energy. We know that we are accessing self-energy when our nervous system calms down. So a calm nervous system means that we are getting to that place where I can have the larger perspective. I can trust my grandson's process. I can trust our relationship. My parts can trust me. My parts can say, if Robin says we don't have to fix it, we don't have to fix it. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's most people report that they know they're accessing self-energy when there's more space inside. When you're anxious, when you're really anxious or you're stressed or overwhelmed, it's like it's really crowded inside.
Mm-hmm.
It can be either really crowded or like a total blank. Right?
Yes, I definitely know that.
Yeah. But when we're calm, like if we're, we're watching this beautiful sunrise and we go, oh my gosh, this feels so good. That's we're tapping into self-energy. And so there's more space inside, things move a bit slower. Perspective, if you find that you can have a larger perspective, then you know that you're probably getting to that place where it's like, okay, now my system, the jargon is, we would say, I am now self-led. My parts aren't doing their thing. I'm worried. I want to fix you. I want to rescue you. I want to control you. I want to share my anxiety with you. It's like, no, there's this room for interaction and relationship.
Definitely. And I appreciate that you gave us that definition again, because I think that it is really important for educators and teachers to be as expert as they possibly can on both scaffolding and self
Yeah.
energy.
Yeah.
Because you'd mentioned in our last talk how we really have to be conscious of what we're putting out in front of students and the kinds of biases we have, and conscious of like how we're showing up,
Mhm.
and how that could foster or prevent students from academic success maybe, or taking healthy risks in the classroom and when it comes to learning. And I was hoping you could just unpack that with me a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So some of the ways that our parts will get in the way of the success of our students. I mean, there's quite a few ways, but I was thinking about that question, and um, I know one thing that I encounter quite a bit with parents is, and not maybe some with teachers, um, but parents I think fall into this quite a bit, and it does make sense. It is that there's this seems to be the kind of this arbitrary timeline for when somebody is supposed to decide what they're going to be when they grow up and what major they're going to um, take, and when they're going to be done, and that kind of. So there's an arbitrary timeline that can really put the pressure on kids. There's also some the parts of us that are looped in and hooked into kind of the capitalistic, consumeristic values of our society, can be very undermining for young people. So, to make decisions about a major, for example, in or what I should be studying, or where my focus should go, based on simply on what's the salary that I'm going to get, is probably not. I mean, kids will do it, but I've had quite a few clients who go down that path, and 2 years into their college education, they're bailing because they're miserable and they can't do it, because they're following something that is mm, somewhat artificial. And I don't mean fake. I mean artificial as in it doesn't really have, it's not something about them and
Hmm.
their path, their life path, and what they want to do. So those are some things, the fears that parents have. Um, there are a lot of ideas from adults in education, in parenting, about productivity and how much work we should be doing and how fast things should be getting done. That lots What I have found over the course I think it happened when standardized testing began to come on board, is that failure is not okay. To fail is not okay. The kids get this message all the time, and that's really hard for the parts of us that know we can't be perfect. If it isn't okay to fail, then it isn't okay to take risks.
Hmm.
And I have had students, when I was teaching, I've had students who wouldn't do anything because they would rather fail from not trying than fail from trying. And
Yeah,
so
it hurts
that,
less.
yes, that message, that is a very, very um, damaging message, that we are not allowed to fail. And so whatever parts in us are involved around that belief system, our own feelings about failing, there's got to be room. I used to tell my students when they were grappling with something and they couldn't get it. I think we talked about math last time and word problems. Um,
Hmm.
I would just tell them, I'm like, I am so glad you don't know how to do this. I get to teach you now. I get to do my job.
Hmm.
You wouldn't be here if you knew all the answers.
Right.
Yeah. And another one is procrastination and laziness. You're such a procrastinator. Don't be lazy. There's really no such thing. I mean, they're doing lots of research now on procrastination. It has nothing to do with willpower. It has to do with parts. It has to do with parts.
I
What,
love how that just came full circle.
yeah, what parts in me don't want to do this? And why? And why? So I, for whatever reason, cannot stand unloading the dishwasher. I can't stand it. And I have parts that will just come right in and go, yeah, we're not doing it. We're just not doing it. Um, and of course that's a place worthy of exploration, but I know it has something to do with parts. And if we're going to honor our internal experience, trying to railroad or bulldoze our way through that isn't helpful. So now what I do, I mean, mostly my husband unloads the dishwasher these days because he's retired. But if I have to do it, then I will negotiate. I was like, okay, I'll unload the glasses now. I'll do the silverware later. I negotiate. So these are some ways that we can really shut kids down. Our fears, our expectations, some fairly narrow ways of understanding what success is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I really resonated with what you were saying on a number of levels, but I think maybe the most pertinent to our conversation is talking about not really giving space for students to fail, and how at the hub we talk a lot about a maker mindset. And a maker mindset is this learning process built around designing, um, like prototyping, iterating, and embracing that the first draft probably won't be the final draft.
yes,
And I think that's so important because before working here, I never really thought about things that way, because I grew up in the society that we're talking about, where you got to know and you got to get it right the first time, and it's so stressful.
it's
And
incredibly stressful.
yeah, and I'm thinking, like, how, as people that are mentoring young people, how can we really implement that maker mindset, or the it's okay to fail mentality, without making students feel bad for trying, or for failing, if and when they do.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I could think of a lot of different ways. Coming back to these concepts of self energy, for example, courage is one, and encouraging young people to take courage. Tap into your courage. Let's try it. Let's see what happens. Another thing that can be really helpful, so coming back to scaffolding, for example, is have them try things where the failure, if they fail, it's easily rectified or self-corrected. There's not a huge investment in what they're doing, so that, and then unpack that and talk with them about that. Modeling, articulating, I did this thing and I really messed up. When I was going through my teaching program, I might have shared this story last time, so forgive me if I'm being redundant, but I was supposed to do a science project on the moon, and the moon, the full moon, the phases of the moon. It was for science. It was to teach middle school science, and I was supposed to come up with this unit. I failed miserably. I couldn't do it, and so when it came time to present this failed experiment to the class, my cohort, instead of presenting the curriculum that I was supposed to have done for this full moon project, instead what I did was I presented, this is what happens when we ask kids to do something that's beyond their capability, because that's exactly what I did. I did something that was beyond my capability. I didn't understand it. I wasn't interested in it. I didn't have um, the understanding. Like I didn't have enough, and I failed. I didn't fail the class because I turned it into a learning lesson about as learning to be a teacher
Hmm.
that helped me understand why kids procrastinate, why kids show up with crappy, I had some kind of poster board. I don't know. It was ridiculous, Casey. It was just embarrassing. It's what it was. But it was such a profound experience for me, who takes so much pride in my facility with academics and everything to fail. And so modeling that, and it was a great lesson for me because I would tell kids all the time, it's like, tried that didn't work. Let's do it different. So,
Hmm.
what is our own relationship with failure?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like um, being comfortable to fail in front of all your students requires a level of groundedness and security in yourself.
Yeah, yeah, it really does. It really does. And so, working with the parts of you, the inner critics, our inner critics, the ones that want to appear competent and in charge, and working with those parts and say, if I show up authentically, which also means to be authentic means to be somewhat vulnerable, um, then my parts, those ones that feel shame or feel humiliation or embarrassment or not good enough, they have to know that I'm going to be okay. That's what's going to allow me to show up authentically and with vulnerability, is I'm going to have to walk away from this and know I'm okay, even if my critics attack me.
Mhm.
So um I almost always, like when I speak publicly or go, present at conferences or whatever, it's always this, I ride this high. It's just the greatest thing ever. But I know myself well enough now that about 12 to 24 hours later, which is really interesting, my critics will show up and they just jabber, jabber, jabber. You shouldn't have said that. And why did you say it? Happened after our last podcast?
Happens to me every time after a podcast.
Yeah. And now I've gotten to the point where it's like, oh, there you are. There you are. I hear you. That feels kind of awful. Yeah. And then I just go on. I feel it and it doesn't feel good, but I don't get pulled into it. And it doesn't prevent me from moving forward.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is that you have this idea in your head that, oh, I said this thing, or I shouldn't have done that, and you're experiencing the sense of failure in a way.
Yeah.
But here you are, days, weeks later, your career is still on the rails, you're
That's right.
still alive, and but in the moment that feels scary. And then I think about, like, when I was in college, I remember being like in algebra class, if we circle back to math, and feeling like just absurd because for some reason I couldn't grasp these equations. And then being like, okay, this is hard and I'm not interested. I'd rather be in art class, and then this is hard and I just would rather not do this because it feels embarrassing that I can't do this. And oh my gosh, like, you kind of run yourself off the rails before you have the tools to reel yourself back in and be like, it's really gonna be okay. If I have to take this class again, I have to take it again. It's not a sign of my worth. But I'm thinking about the young kids that may not feel that way and they get, really discouraged by the fact that maybe they're not, grasping the equation, and how could I possibly
Yeah.
get any further in this? My destiny is to work, I mean, not that it's an unhonorable job to work in like fast food or something that maybe doesn't need a higher education degree. Um, but if that becomes like the consequence, because society's like, well, you have to have like the highest paying job,
Right,
X, Y,
right.
and Z.
Yeah,
How do we, as mentors, go to those kids and be like where do we even start to get them
yeah,
to the place that you're at now, where you can look back and be like, yeah, that was just a
yeah,
thing. It's not a big deal. I'm fine.
yeah. Um, the as you were talking, so the last blog posting was on scaffolding, and I
Hmm.
put a link in there about this video with a little girl skateboarding and her dad scaffolding her, and what was so great about that, because she fell and he's there, and he is that he praises her. He first of all he tells her in her place of fear, you don't have to do this. So he gives her a choice, self energy word.
Hmm.
You don't have to do this. Now, some adults might say, oh, you'll be fine. Just get up there. You can do it. I'll be right here. No, he says, he gives her a choice. You don't have to do it. But she says, I want to do it, but I'm scared. Perfect. I want to do this, but I'm scared. And so then he says, I'll be right here. We'll do this together. So she gets to the point where she's done it and she's competent now. And he says to her, I just am so proud of you for being brave and trying this. And I think that what we can do as mentors with our kids is we look for the places where they're trying, even if it's incremental. I mean, incremental. If you have, I'm going to go back to like elementary school, look at kids that young who feel like they're not good students. They don't know how to do this or whatever. And so they don't. If you have a kid who's picked up their pencil and written their name on their paper, that's what you go to. Wonderful. What a great start. What a
Hmm.
great start. Yeah, that took a lot of courage to pick up that pencil, didn't it? Because I know you feel really stuck. So instead of saying, gosh, is that all you've done is gotten your name on your paper? And so, and I know there's a middle ground there. Like we can't just always, I'm thinking about, the teachers and parents who might be listening. It's like, God, what if all they ever do is just write their name on their paper? But but it's the baby steps. You got your name on the paper. Let's see if we can come up with your first sentence. Um, let's see if we can get that first equation down. So you're breaking it down, when they feel overwhelmed. Um, Zoning in on their strengths, highlighting that. Um, I was thinking too about, this idea about the STEM field, the field of STEM academics and jobs, professions. And one of the thoughts that I had, so I'm just coming out of this conference where we talked about meaning and how important it is for kids, for all of us to feel like we have meaning in our lives. And this is an antidote to the capitalistic, consumeristic, materialistic way. And if we're thinking about the foundations of almost all the STEM fields, I mean, we're talking about the nature of the universe, right? I mean, we're talking about like the fundamental nature of the universe. Now, you start tapping into that, now we've got meaning.
Hmm.
Now we've got meaning. And so, what better place for creativity? And coming back to what you were saying, the maker mindset, play. Like, how do we play with this? How do we explore? And bringing that in, holy moly, with kids and any kids, young and adolescent. Now we're bringing it back into relevant. Is it relevant to them? Adolescents want to, you tell them that this work will change the world, they're all about it. I was thinking about when you said something about art, when you're in your art class, and gosh, why don't I just do this and do this thing over here? And I was thinking, there's a couple of people that come to mind, um, like that you can we can pull in all kinds of things um, into the STEM fields. There's a woman named Maria Popova, who she's the one that has the column, The Marginalian, used to be Brain Pickings, and she doesn't do it anymore. I think she had to stop because of COVID, but she used to host um, an event called The Universe in Verse, and she would have people reading poems that were based on science. And I'm thinking there's this wonderful author, essayist, Lewis Thomas. He's long gone now, but he was all about astronomy and birds and in these brilliant essays that he wrote. I learned so much about science from reading this literature, right? Um, Art, of course, the sacred geometry. I mean, there's so many ways. So tapping into that and play, mentors, teachers, parents can bring these rich, wonderful, multifaceted ways that tap right into the creative, playful spirit of children and the idealistic, um, uh, visionary nature of adolescence. And this just, ooh, it just feels so good, right? I mean, it's not this dry, this is me, a non-STEM person. I just want to, this dry way of thinking about these, these subjects in these fields.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of times people have dry experiences in these kinds of classrooms. But as you were talking, I was also thinking about, I just listened to this podcast with the music producer, Rick Rubin. He's giving an interview about the book he wrote recently and talking about how creative adults need to essentially unlearn what they have learned through society to kind of access a playful aspect. And part of the creation process from idea to publish is there needs to be a whole exploration play kind of phase.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
um I just think that's interesting because if you look at it from a person who, I mean, has very noted success in an area, and they're even saying play, like how can we get this
yeah,
exploration, this childlike kind of wonder, and really embrace it
yeah.
moving forward. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really important, coming back to your question about biases. It's really important for us, if we're saying, "Oh, I should do this," or "You should do that," or "You need to do that." When we hear those words "should" or "need" or "you shouldn't" or "don't," big giant question mark. Where is that coming from? Who
Hmm.
says? You need to make sure you get, your college degree. Um, don't don't do it this way. Don't you need to be sure and make sure that it's da 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 da. It's like, I'm not so sure about that. Where
Maybe it's an interaction of an adult part
Yes,
versus the interaction of a child or an adolescent's inner parts.
yes, exactly, exactly. It's it is a rule bound kind of adult part that usually comes from a very well intended. I want to make sure, that my child is set up for success and so on and so forth. But that's that's the kind of mindset, I think, that's gotten us into trouble with where we're at now. This kind of rigid thinking about what success is. Not rigid, but a
There's like a
fairly,
right and wrong to success.
yes,
It's
exactly.
it's either looks like this or it's not success.
Yes, exactly, exactly, exactly.
I think that it makes things really complicated for adolescents that are starting to have to make those choices. You know,
Hmm.
because something maybe doesn't look like a path to success for a person, but society is saying you need to do X, Y, and Z,
Yeah,
or otherwise you're lazy or you're not trying, or, you know, like any of those things that are like pretty hurtful to say and not necessarily true. Um,
yeah.
and I guess I kind of lost where I was going with that, but um, yeah.
No, I agree with you. And this is one of the reasons why the name of my business is the Shiftless Wanderer. Because the the idea that it's like a reclamation of this idea that came from Eric Erickson, a developmental psychologist, and he said that if young people aren't given really, these tasks, and we don't get them on the road to success, or to be contributing members of society, then they're just going to wander shiftlessly. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. So it's a reclamation of that. And it really comes from my own experience of how I got here, because I look back, and it was a very windy, looping path. And this is something I tell my young people, my young clients, all the time. They're fretting, what if I don't get into this college, and what if I don't do this, and I've got to do, and I was like, it doesn't work that way. Life, you can try as hard as you want, but life comes along and says, no, it, there is no straight line. And it could be life out there. Um, you try your hardest and you don't get into the college you want to get into, or you get into the college you want to get into and your mother's diagnosed with cancer, or you fall into a deep depression. So it could be out there or inside, right? It, but something's going to come. It's never a straight line. And and so how do we meet those places where it feels like there's a barrier in our way forward? And how do we accept that this is as it is? And there's nothing we're going to be able to do to change this. So now what do we do? Now what do we do?
It's such a great question.
Yeah, there's a constraint here. And what do I do with this constraint? And I always go back to, so my original, my very first identity is a poet. And when we write poetry, some of the best poems are tightly constrained. There are these like rules. How many lines? How many syllables? What's the rhyme pattern? Like all of these, what's the rhythm, stress of the syllables, and forcing a creative act inside the box of those constraints can create something absolutely astounding. And the same thing can be said. I meet this boulder in the road, it's a constraint. How do I work within that to create something meaningful?
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah.
This idea is making me think about how a straight path in life doesn't seem to be the norm any longer. When you look back at older generations, you can see people more often would have like one career or would work in one industry for their entire, working life and then be done. And more often now we're seeing a curved wandering path of maybe I'll work in this industry for a while and then, oh, I'm kind of tired of this. What if I reskill and I go over here? And then maybe again in a few years and again. And
Yes. Yeah.
yeah. And then, I mean, because, people sometimes will say doing something and being an expert is kind of the end goal of success, but by how we're seeing the shift in careers moving from here to there, that's kind of the antithesis of becoming an expert. You're
Mm-hmm.
more of a jack of all trades.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And coming back to this idea of the wandering path, we don't know where that's going to lead. And where I am at now in my career, in my life, it and as I look back, it's like I kind of see all of these roads that I went down kind of coming together, and they've joined. They're here. They're all here. Um, and I could not have known that when I went, from being a teacher to being a therapist to being a teacher again to, like being a therapist again, working in this, I just was kind of, and now here I'm at, and it's like, okay, all the pieces, it feels like, have come together, but it's taken me 30 years to get here.
Yeah.
And I didn't, and before that, like I said last time, I majored in English in college, so I mean, if we include that, then it's been a 40-year journey. But
Mhm.
yeah, so, and there is something too I know about, like, corporate America, that is, whether it's the cause or the effect of this not staying in one profession and one job. But I know that it used to be you were loyal to the company. The company was going to take care of you. The benefits, the health care benefits, the retirement benefits, all of that. And they don't do that anymore. And so
Right.
why stay? Right? Why
Yeah,
stay?
totally.
Yeah.
And maybe instead of teaching our students to be loyal to a company, we could figure out how we could teach them to be more loyal to themselves and,
Hmm.
living a life that feels authentic and good to them,
Hmm.
even if it doesn't look like the traditional picture of success.
Yeah. 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 And I know this doesn't have anything to do with the STEM field, but there's Chef's Table on the show Chef's Table. It's on Netflix.
Hmm.
I started watching it, and the first episode in the Noodles series is a perfect example of this. This is a man who did not know what he was going to do with his life, and he decided to. He found that he loved making pasta. He invested all this money into a restaurant. I mean, thousands and thousands of dollars, and he was scammed and lost like $2 million. And he just didn't, like, his whole life just came to this screeching halt. And the story is like how he just kept moving forward, figuring out what all of the pieces that had come before, and what do I do now? What do I do now? And making his way, and what he felt like the world needed, that he had to give. And
And that
that,
was noodles.
and noodles, pasta, really. And he specializes in the old Italian noodle making, that's starting to, to the elders that know the craft are dying. So he is learning how to make this so that he can, carry on that tradition. And so the same could be for all manner of things, I think, in the STEM field, but also what is new. And I think this idea of young people carving out ways of working in the STEM field, especially females, what they can bring, new perspectives, new things that have value to them that perhaps males do not. Um, I think is so important, because again, this idea that we don't know what the future holds. And maybe we need what these young people are coming in and bringing and pushing the edges of. Maybe we need this based on what the world is going to look like, 20, 30 years from now with climate change.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And you think about some of the top performing companies and how they are all toting that they have diverse workforces and thought rooms. And yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we just don't know. We just don't.
Yes, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
I realize that our time's coming to a close and that hour went by so fast.
Always, always.
I really appreciate your time, and I'm so stoked on how we had such a wandering path through
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
hour.
I can't do that, Casey. Sometimes I need somebody to kind of rein me back in.
I thought it was fascinating, and thank you again. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you are so welcome. You are so welcome. It was lovely being here.
Thanks for listening to Closing the Gap. This podcast is a production of the Mid-Valley STEM-CTE Hub. If you would like to be part of the conversation, fill out our interest form at midvalleystem.org/closingthegap. If you like the show, follow us on Spotify to stay up to date with the newest episodes. And for STEM news in the Mid-Willamette Valley, follow the Mid-Valley STEM-CTE Hub on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.